afternoon and good evening to all. I'm gonna let everyone pause for a moment of reflection. The long weekend is behind us, the summer is coming to a close. I guess if you're far south, it doesn't really matter. And if you're up in Minnesota or northern latitudes, we'll shed a tear for you that will very soon freeze on your cheek because the winter will be here. But what a year it's been so far. We have delved into a multitude of different things: anti-aging, the gut-lung axis. We're back for yet another topic. And as you may have guessed from the not so secretive title here, today we're focusing on nattokinase and going into all things natto, which, if you pause and think about that, it might not sound like the most exciting thing in the world. I mean, it's one specific ingredient, it's a single ingredient supplement formula. How possibly interesting could it be for an hour? I'm going to challenge that convention because I had to actually come up with an hour's worth of information. And when you're diving deep on a topic, I like to hit all the way to the bottom to see just what we're dealing with. Because for me to know something is to know the what, the why, and the how, and taking those conceptual concepts and applying them to specific scenarios and cases like we try to do. So without further ado, I hope you can all put on your propeller hats because we're going to get to know good old Natto. And it's fun to say because it rhymes. And Jeff just said that this made him hungry because it looked appetizing. I quite the opposite in my world. Not only because looking at this photo, it doesn't look appetizing at all. I've actually tried natto in Japan because it is one of their staple dishes. It is a fermented soybean product. Good. And I believe the Japanese eat it solely for the purpose of its health benefits, not for its culinary delights. Because unfortunately, when you pick it up on a pair of chopsticks, it has the consistency of snot. Has been a staple in, I believe, a strong reason, in addition to the general dietary practices in certain parts of Japan, why they have one of the lowest occurrences of cardiovascular diseases of any nation, because they're essentially supplementing themselves on a regular basis every time they have breakfast, lunch, and or dinner. This is the nattokinase we know, this proteinaceous structure. And nattokinase is the enzyme conserved that is essentially, and its use in a clinical context is because it is an incredibly potent blood clot dissolving protein traditionally used in cardiovascular diseases and cardiovascular situations where the accumulation of plaque and the development of arterial sclerosis typically is treated naturally in a very effective way using nattokinase. Nattokinase, like all other enzymes, is in and itself a protein. All enzymes are protein. In this case, it's a 275 amino acid protein, and it's part of a protein classification that's called a serine protease. And these are in always the most widely used proteases in the body. This happens to be an exogenous serine protease that we take for its endogenous benefits, but many proteins in the body have this same function because what a serine protease does is it breaks down proteins in conjunction with the immune system to help to help the body dissolve unwanted proteins. So the translation to that is it's a specialized protein that is designed to cleave a protein chain at a very specific site. And why it's called a serine protease is that serine amino acid is actually the site of the magic where the chemical docking or the bonding with a very specific site on a protein, and in the case of nattokinase, we're talking about the fibrin protein, reaction happens where the serine docks to the target protein, and as a result of a change in chemistry, typically donating some electrons, the bond is broken. The protein starts to unravel itself, and as the protein changes its structure, it changes its function in the body. So if you break the bonds of a fibrin protein, delinking of that bond no longer decrees it as a fibrin protein, so therefore it's no longer problematic to the body. And now the rest of the immune system, all the white blood cells, have been given the signal to finish the job at breaking down, to either recycle its amino acids or to dissolve it and detoxify it to get it out of the body, because when in the body it's problematic. Out of the body, it's no longer contributing to a clot. So when it comes to the concept of should I eat natto or should I take natto, I'll let you guys be the judge. I would much rather take the supplement than have to eat something like this on a regular basis. And for the bonus points, a supplement is always much more bioavailable and bioactive when it comes to the therapeutic qualities of something. Not saying natto is food. So if you only take one thing away from today, and it's really important to always have a focal point or at least an intentional focal point of what you want people to know or know about a specific topic. If you're a practitioner or if you are a healthcare provider, a coach, someone who is either guiding other people or working with other people directly, if anyone ever mentions anything about cardiovascular health, to me, the immediate association should be nattokinase as a mainstay, not only for treatment, but for prevention, because there's an incredible amount of research that shows long-term use of nattokinase correlates with a healthy cardiovascular system in the fifth, sixth, and seventh decade of life. But to understand something is to really dive deep into it. When we think of the cardiovascular system, I think we take it for granted. We just assume it's the heart, it's the arteries, it's the lungs. But the cardiovascular system in my world is probably the single most important thing to consider for long-term health. Why? I mean, it's in the saying the lifeblood. We have to understand the details of the cardiovascular system to understand why to not only protect, but when we're dealing with something clinically, be it an organ dysfunction, a tissue, a cellular problem, the cardiovascular system is always implicated. We've had an energy problem occur somewhere. If we have an issue, we need to be able to get enough raw materials, nutrients, oxygen, vitamins, minerals back to that area in order for the body to heal. So, unless we understand how the cardiovascular system plays its role in the bigger picture of health, I think some of these statements about why caring for the cardiovascular system or targeting it are a little bit taken for granted. I'll explain what I mean. So this is the fundamentals of our cardiovascular system. We have the heart pumps blood around the body. The oxygenated blood is sent out via the side. It's delivered to the various organs, tissues, and cells that require all the nutrition that blood provides. And then once those organs, tissues, and cells have consumed what it is they need, it is then removed, i.e., the blood and the waste materials are removed from that specific area, returned back to the cardiovascular system as deoxygenated blood, pumped back to the heart and lungs, and the cycle starts again. This entire circuit happens within a matter of a few minutes in terms of its totalitarian circulation around the body. And we have to remember that every second we're not delivering nutrition is a second that we're actually compromising the body. It is one series of interconnected pipes. If there's a problem in one of the pipes, technically there is a problem potential in every single pipe. And the area where the body starts to suffer first is an area that we can't perceive. It's the tiny little capillaries. So it starts from a large artery, then it becomes smaller and narrower, and it becomes an arteriole. After it becomes an arteriole, after it branches off of the main circulatory network, it becomes a capillary. And in some cases, capillaries can be as small in diameter as a single red blood cell. So we must understand that for our body to adequately deliver all the nutrition that comes in addition to the oxygen, which is the entire purpose of the existence of a red blood cell, not only do we have to have healthy, clog-free pipes, but we have to have blood that is not too sticky. We have to have platelets that don't want to get together too often. We have little coagulation. We also need to have flexible red blood cells that are properly structured so they can hold that oxygen and deliver it to tissues. And we typically see in terms of the order of operations of how the cardiovascular system becomes compromised, it starts in the small capillary beds, then it moves to the arterioles, then arteries. And it typically becomes a problem of pathology when we have the larger arteries become clogged, because when you clog the major route or the major network of piping that goes either to and from the heart or to and from the brain, that's when the medical system steps in and usually wants to perform some sort of procedure or some sort of intervention. But unfortunately, then a lot of damage has been done and a lot of health and vitality has potentially been taken away from the body because of what functionally happens when the system gets clogged up. Blood has to be transported, as I said, through these tiny capillaries into what's called the ground matrix or the connective tissue for specific organ systems and cells. And we have to understand that what comes in the blood is actually that which sustains the energy of every single cell in our bodies. The body wants to make energy in the presence of adequate energy that comes in from the food we eat and the food that we've talked about many times that we hopefully digest and adequately break down, absorb, and assimilate. So we still can't escape digestion, even though we're talking about the cardiovascular system. And the oxygen that's present in every single red blood cell, and the hemoglobin specifically of every single red blood cell, so that cell can perform the necessary work and duties that it requires to be part of a bigger picture organism that is us, the human. If these areas are compromised, not only nutrition that the cells need for their optimal performance not be adequately delivered, but all the waste materials that come out of the metabolic processes that that cell perform are unable to properly leave. You have to understand that cells are like humans. They take in energy just like we eat food, and they vacate waste material just like we poop and we pee and we cough and we sneeze. And if cells aren't able to properly detoxify and remove things on a regular basis, then we create problem that I believe connects to every chronic degenerative scenario or system, because not only do we not remove waste properly, we congest the lymph and we throw the balance of the body off to the point where the anabolic and the catabolic processes, the buildup and the breakdown, and if you want to geek out, you can look at pathways like the mTOR and the AMPK pathways, we dysregulate them. And the body is forever trying to compensate in order to find a homeostasis again. And if we don't understand the nature of the importance of this entire perspective for the bigger picture of health, then we really do take the cardiovascular system for granted. And I want to hit home with this physiologic rule that I abide by. When energy is adequate, health and optimal are sustained holistically within the organism, but also within an organ, a tissue, and a cell. When energy is limited, states of compromise are the initiation to pathology if sustained. I want everyone to take a second to think about that because pathology is a disease process. And we've talked about this many times. A pathology or a disease is unfortunately a conscious decision by the body because it's the only plan of action that's left in order for it to keep alive, to sustain itself. So, regardless of one's state of health or disease, the above statement will always hold true. And regardless of what one's suffering with, we become so distracted by the diagnoses of what a medical professional gives to us that we forget basic tenets still hold true for what help us get back to health and sustains our health. What does a cell need in order for it to survive? It needs water, which is about 93% of what blood is. It needs oxygen, which is the only way to get that oxygen is from adequate circulatory nature. We need macronutrients, so we need to be able to digest our proteins, our carbs, and our fats. We need to be able to adequately partition them and send them out to the relative sites of need so those macronutrients can either build structure, provide energy. We need minerals and electrolytes to help catalyze biochemical reactions and also regulate, the intracellular hydration and the environments both inside and outside the cell. And we need vitamins for cofactors, typically for enzyme reactions to happen. These five variables, although a bit reductionist for all intents and purposes, explain how biochemistry is maintained. And anything that dysregulates this process of delivery and the removal of waste material, I believe, causes disease. So, this delivery system is the main purpose of the cardiovascular system in the context of health. And if we compromise the delivery of these nutrients, unfortunately, the compensation is what creates the pathology, as I just said. If we have an inadequate amount of oxygen, we can't do things aerobically. Aerobic means with oxygen. So thankfully, we have a backup plan called anaerobic metabolism. But if anyone's ever run a 100-meter race, they know what it feels like when their legs are pumped full of lactate and their energy level is absolutely in the basement because anaerobic metabolism is very limiting in terms of its ultimate supply of energy, and it creates a lot of waste materials, specifically changes in pH. Without adequate regulation of oxygen, the intracellular environment of a cell becomes very acidic. And when a cell becomes acidic, the utilization ratio of oxygen and carbon dioxide become imbalanced. So when we're not bleeding off enough carbon dioxide because we're not making energy aerobically, we don't pull that oxygen in from a red blood cell. And as a result, pH, and we further drive anaerobic metabolism, and we become sugar addicts. We become sugar burners because it's the only nutrient you can burn anaerobically. So as a result of that, not only are we making less overall energy for the cell to be healthy, but waste removal, just like nutrition intake, requires energy. So the waste accumulating in the cell is no different than if you stopped cleaning your house for 2 months. You wouldn't even want to know what the heck was living under the furry things in your carpet, because waste is just going to create an environment for an inhospitable collection of organisms. And that's essentially what attracts bacteria and fungus and mold and things of that nature. It's the terrain, it's not the germ in and of itself. When the waste accumulates, we typically have issues with mineral imbalances because we start to disassociate specific minerals, or we overuse or underutilize minerals. And when that's compromised, specifically, we have dehydration within the cell. Even though we're drinking enough water, our cells can actually dehydrate themselves and further compromise the problem. So that is my way of looking at the cardiovascular system in the bigger picture of holistic health, because my bias is, all problems are total, whether it's a neurological challenge or a cardiovascular challenge. And that's why understanding the cardiovascular system makes it really easy for us to understand why using something like nattokinase as a preventative strategy, even when there's no need for something to be diagnosed, can help maintain the flow and the fluidity of that natural process, the yin and the yang of the ins and the outs there. But most people in the medical profession are thinking about diseases and pathologies more so than likely the holistic nature. So we have to examine nattokinase and the cardiovascular system and where they intersect under the conditions of pathology. So CVD, cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, which I've practiced pronouncing many times, so I didn't, flub it on the webinar, is still, I believe, the leading cause of death in the Western world. And I do believe it's very misunderstood still. It's the reason we have an overprescription of statins. It's a reason people stop eating fat in their diet. A lot of crazy things we do in terms of prevention strategies because we don't necessarily understand what's going on. The generation and buildup of arterial plaque is a conscious decision by the body to try to heal itself. The unfortunate reality of this attempt to heal is the generation of a lot of collateral damage. The initiation of any sort of injury in a blood vessel, in an artery, comes from some sort of inflammation, be it something floating around in the bloodstream that causes an oxidation reaction, could be things like accumulation of heavy metals, could be bacterial translocation from the gut. The causes are multifactorial. When you have the initial injury, the body will send out signals to try to generate the necessary resolution. So anytime you think injury, think inflammation. Anytime you think inflammation, think the immune system. And as a result of the ongoing injury process, a multitude of different things are attracted to the site of inflammation, and the plaque is essentially the body's attempt to create a patch. If you ever punched a hole in drywall and you've tried to patch it unsuccessfully, that's typically what happens when a clot forms and then a clot essentially translocates. When it comes to the contents of that clot, it is not only cholesterol, it is not only proteinaceous accumulation like fibrin and things of that nature. It's a combination of different things. And what those things typically are an ongoing inflammation that continues to create a larger layer to the point where the plaque accumulation starts to narrow the blood flow. So if you look on the right-hand side there, you see enlarged smooth muscle cells. You see a fibrous cap with collagens. And you might go, oh, well, I take collagen protein. Is that dangerous? No. Collagen protein is one of the main body proteins that the human body uses to create structure of stability. You see macrophages, which are white blood cells that essentially are attracted to the sites of inflammation, and they try to gobble up some of the debris and they end up dying, and they create foam cells, which then interact with LDL cholesterol because the body will also send cholesterol and lipids there. And then as a result of that area being compromised, the blood there is also likely more viscous because you have greater degree of platelets aggregating together. If this is a small time scenario, you will see fatty streaks being the initial genesis. As it progresses, the plaque becomes thicker in terms of its deposition, and as a result of it up against the muscular layer, it's going to cause greater and greater narrowing, which is usually accompanied with higher blood pressure over the course of time. And the real issue is when the thrombosis can happen. So when the fibrous cap on the layer of the endothelial lining ruptures, that plaque can actually get dislodged and start to circulate in the circulatory system. And the real worry is when the thrombic plaque aggregation finds its way near a main vessel close to the heart or close to the brain. Typically, we call that a myocardial infarction if it's in the heart, and if it's thick enough and it gets near the brain, we call that a stroke. So this is what could be happening under the surface for the vast majority of people alive right now, because if you've reached the fourth or fifth decade of your life, you've unfortunately likely accumulated some arterial plaque. So now that we understand the bigger picture aspects of holistic health and then the more minute microscopic aspects of CVD and atherosclerosis, we have to figure out, where does nattokinase come in? How is it nattokinase has the ability to break down plaque? And this was probably the driest part of the whole thing, but I'm going to try to make it very simplistic. Chart is something you'll find many times over, and this is the most straightforward color-coded one that allows you to understand the different details of how all roads lead to the breakdown of fibrin, or that gray rectangle there that says fibrin thrombus. So the decomposition products, the disassembly of fibrin, is really where nattokinase shines. There are three specific ways in which the use of nattokinase as a long-term ongoing body accelerate the breakdown of the proteins within the plaque. Because if we go back here, you can see that the fibrous cap of collagen and the thrombosis, the protein aggregation, is really what nattokinase is helping the body break down. Because while there is an injury here, the immune system is always trying to resolve that injury. So the action one, nattokinase has the ability to directly dissolve the accumulated fibrin, and that's via protease activity. So it breaks the chemical bonds to initiate the dissolution of the protein itself with the aid of the white blood cells. So it's the enzyme plus the immune system is able to actually intervene and directly neutralize the fibrin content of plaque itself. It's the first thing that nattokinase does. The second is the upregulation of this TP. So a lot of big words are coming, so keep your, hold on to your hats. So nattokinase, by its presence in the body, is able to inactivate an inhibitor of the body's own natural plasminogen activator. Yes, it's a bit of a mouthful. The bottleneck here is there is a process which there is an inhibition of one of the body's internal clot breakdown enzymes. And typically that happens when there's a clot building up and the processes are greater than that the body can contend with. What you want to do, physiologically speaking, is to activate the body's natural plasmin enzyme. So the body's natural clot breakdown enzymes can be inhibited if the clot is forming too quickly or too greatly. So as a result of nattokinase being present, it helps the body to activate its own internal enzymes, which then directly act upon the fibrin itself and initiate, or I should say, probably assist in the nattokinase ability to break down said protein. So the first action is the direct breakdown of fibrin. The second action is to stop something that inhibits the breakdown of fibrin naturally in the body. The third action, which is very similar to the second, is the activation of what's called urokinase. So nattokinase is able to directly activate a pro-enzyme called pro-urokinase, which converts to urokinase in the same digestive process. Pepsinogen in the stomach converts to pepsin under acidic conditions. When urokinase is activated, and once that can once again activate the plasmin enzyme to stimulate the endogenous breakdown of the accumulated fibrin protein. We'll let everyone chew on that for a moment. But to round it out, there are three distinct actions that happen metabolically upon taking nattokinase: direct breakdown, one specific pathway, two pathways of indirect breakdown, which means there's a lot of activity going on to directly target the fibrin protein itself. But we have to remember that in addition to that, there are some anti clotting, anti thrombic, and platelet aggregating qualities of nattokinase. So not only are they acting upon where there may be accumulated proteins in a clot, they're also helping to thin the blood more like water, less like syrup, because you want blood to flow effortlessly wherever it is that it needs to go. And really, what's happening here from a physiologic perspective is the systemic enzymes are augmenting and enhancing the body's natural anticoagulant and antithrombotic processes. But in order for them to do this, there are two important variables. Number one is time. Have thrombotic activity have done so over the course of 4, 5, or 6 decades of life. It is a slow process, which is nice because if it were instantaneous, there'd be a lot of people who drop dead of the heart attack at probably 16 years old. As a result of its slow genesis, the breakdown process is likely also going to mirror that and be slow. So taking nattokinase for a week, a month, up to a year might not generate massive differences, but over time, with consistent use, the effect of the enzyme itself will add to what the body can naturally do. But we have to understand that in order to properly do this, someone has to change their lifestyles entirely. They cannot continue drinking beer, eating fast food, smoking, not exercising, and simply start taking nattokinase and everything's going to be okay. You need to align all of the optimal variables for that person to reverse the situation that they've been in. Said differently, if all the actions and activities they engaged in generated this physiologic problem for themselves, activities to the polar opposite in a positive way for the body to be able to resolve itself and really make use of what nattokinase can do. We get tons of questions surrounding viral infections, inflammatory processes, immune activation, spike proteins. And what's wonderful about nattokinase and mainstream medicine is research is starting to come out. Now, I don't focus on this area myself, so I will only share some of the research that I read during the creation of these slides. But there's strong data to show that nattokinase has a very crucial role in the ability to unravel again the linking of specific formations of spike proteins. So a lot of the problem with long COVID, and long COVID is defined as symptoms that are lasting longer than 3 months perpetually, is the constant presence of pro-immune stimulatory proteins creates an inflammatory response. That inflammatory response has a local effect, typically respiratory in nature, but we're also finding that it has systemic issues, especially if someone has areas of weakness or areas of susceptibility when it comes to how a viral infection is able to attack that area and how the immune system isn't able to clear it. And I put two links to two really good studies that I encourage everyone to do, because if you are dealing with clients who have had a lot of trouble since the pandemic hit, and they're looking for answers, this would be the next starting point. Because how it works with fibrin proteins, any protein is nothing more than a series of amino acids linked together in a very specific sequence. Certain protease enzymes, like the serine proteases, are one of the most powerful, we'll call them degraders and neutralizers of pro-inflammatory proteins in the body. And it seems that a lot of viral infections come with these specific kinds of proteins that enzymes like nattokinase and possibly others have the ability to either intercept and disrupt, and working with the immune system, have the ability to start to break down some of the very proteins that are causing the inflammatory response, the chronic immune activity, which the person is experiencing as long-held symptoms. As I mentioned, it is symptoms that are lasting longer than 3 months, not 3 weeks, but it's fragile patients. It's people with high levels of susceptibility. And the problem isn't necessarily the virus, it's the inability to clear the virus. And as you can see from all the different areas where these proteins and these viral fragments are able to affect, it's astrocytes and neurons, so it's neurological, it's endothelial cells, so it's cardiovascular, it's lymphocytes, it's immune cells. And when they're infecting and proliferating, the stronger the virus is directly correlated to how weak the body is. So if the immune system is unable to clear it, you need to use additional agents of support like systemic enzymes to help the body properly clear what it's unable to deal with. So now that we've delved into anatomy, physiology, pharmacokinetics, mechanisms of action, let's get into the clinical uses of nattokinase. So we do know what the main focus of nattokinase is. It's the all-star when it comes to its fibrolytic activity, anti-hyper those with blood pressure, anti-atherosclerotic, bringing down the accumulation of plaques, lowering lipids, possibly triglycerides, reducing the stickiness of platelets, and the neuroprotective effects, because remember, the brain is organ and it uses a lot of blood on a regular basis in order to actually supply all the neurons and astrocytes with adequate amounts of energy. So we know what the specific functions are within nattokinase. Not all nattokinase ROM. The thing that we always try to do is we put quality second to none. We look for the best and then we figure out how do we optimally process it and how do we optimally formulate it. So we can definitively say that for those who it matters to, even though soy is the base raw material from which nattokinase is made, the final ingredient has zero soy content in it whatsoever. And not only that, we start with non-GMO soybean. The second thing we do is we try to go above and beyond for potency and also for dosing. So if you do some quick math, the average nattokinase supplement out there has about 2,000 functional units. So if you multiply that extra amount via our 93 cap bottle, not a 90, you have extra activity per bottle. So each bottle goes a longer way in terms of its ability to yield efficacious outcomes in the cardiovascular system. In addition to using the highest quality nattokinase we can find with the most pure processing methods, we add catalase to help scavenge free radicals. We also add astrozyme, which is our proprietary combination of trace minerals, because every enzyme needs a mineral cofactor for its maximal activation, because the more energetic an enzyme, the more it can do work in the body. And we also use delayed release capsules to make sure that that capsule is going to be getting into the body through the upper tract, surviving the harsh conditions of the stomach. And when taken on an empty stomach, which is absolutely essential to say, these enzymes are going to be conserved as they get across the epithelial barrier and delivered to where it is they need to go. For those who are very curious about cross-contaminations and allergens, we have much data to show that across the board, there is the presence of none of the common allergens, and there's the absence of all of them, regardless of what batch you're testing. And the only time that there's soy in the process is, as I said, it's as the raw material in the initiation of the extraction via the Bacillus subtilis. And we can say that our raw materials always originate for nattokinase from the US, which is kind of nice. So as a clinician, what are your go-tos? Where are you thinking to plug this into your clinical practice? As I said, if there's one thing that you can take away from today, it's that any time there is pathology in the cardiovascular system, you have blood clots, you have the buildup of arterial plaque, someone has a potential stroke candidate or has had one already. Anything that compromises the ability of blood to flow optimally within the cardiovascular system, that's the anyone has a consideration or a concern for neurological challenges. Heart attacks are number one. Other than cancer, strokes are not far enough in the distance. As I said, there is a lot of fragile artery and circuitry that goes from the cardiovascular system up to the brain. So making sure that if there is anything within the blood that is compromising the brain as a result of its delivery, that's the second go-to in my world. The third thing would be using them for long latent viral infections, because what research shows is what has been clinically validated and studied in a laboratory or a study-based setting. There are scenarios where practitioners practice different kinds of medicine to where if they're testing something against a patient, nattokinase may come up and it may be outside the bounds of these potential things right here. What I believe is there's probably more that nattokinase does in the body when it comes to overall systemic health that we don't yet know, hopefully will in the future. But I believe the power of enzymes are incredibly underappreciated in the Western world because we're relatively late to the party compared to Europe and different parts of Asia when it comes to systemic and proteolytic enzymes being a household therapy in natural medicine. And a cool thing when it comes to the use of enzymes, because they have such a great safety profile and they combine so well, one of my favorite combinations for using nattokinase in conjunction with other ingredients is using something like magnesium malate and vitamin K2 in combination because of the antihypertensive, antithrombotic, calcium reducing effects of those other minerals and vitamins that work hand in hand with nattokinase. They complement each other in terms of the overall effect that they can have, positively speaking, in the cardiovascular system. When it comes to dosing, this is where, again, I always put the onus on the clinician and the practitioner to make their ultimate decision. The vast majority of guidance when it comes to how much nattokinase someone should use says about 2,000 functional units a day, which relates to one capsule of the average nattokinase supplement. Nattozyme is 2,200 functional units, so we have a little greater potency than the average, but one capsule is actually a very, very small dose. I would say that this is a great starting point for the average person who is interested in prevention. Higher dosing, 2 to 3 capsules on a regular basis for someone who already is hypertensive or pre-hypertensive, has some degree of atherosclerotic buildup, or has concern for their cardiovascular wellness, dose for the average person. But I will say again that you do have to use nattokinase consistently over a period of months, if not long, because it takes a while for the body to have an adequate amount of external effect to create an internal meaningful change, if that makes sense. The wonderful thing about nattokinase from a research perspective, its safety profile is unsurpassed when it comes to comparing its ability to not generate a negative response when taking a high dose compared to other supplements out there. And I've put a looked at 1,062 hypertensive atherosclerotic patients, and they dosed them up to 10,800 functional units per day, which if you do the math on Nattozyme, that's about 8 to 10 capsules of Nattozyme a day. And not only was there no negative aspects observed, but the progression in the betterment of the atherosclerosis and the hyperlipidemia was significantly improved over the control group, which was still taking 3,600 functional units. So almost twice the suggested doses that most research outlets start people at. This is where if you are someone who's using something beyond biochemical testing and blood work, if you do something like applied kinesiology, electronic acupuncture, things of that nature, you can actually figure out what your client wants, providing you trust in the information coming off of that client's body when you're anecdotally testing them in your office, obviously on a case-by-case basis. Who are interested in launching their own brand but want the access to something like nattokinase or some of the other products that we have, Nattozyme is actually now available as a direct private label. And if you are interested in exploring this opportunity, because many people nowadays are building their brand and they want everything under one, out to your local rep and get Nattozyme or Therazyme or some of the other products, which I'll show you right here. Digestzyme, Therazyme, Nattozyme, Theralac Pro, and Trubifido Pro, which we've covered all so far this year, are now available in terms of the ability to private label them with the exact same potency and purity that you buy from master supplements and U.S.Enzymes. And to shine a light, just to finish off here on some of the other products that have nattokinase in them, I island supplement from the U.S.Enzymes line would either be Therazyme or Digestzyme. And if I'm living on a desert island, food would probably be at a minimum, but potential infections would be at a maximum. So I'm going to pick Therazyme only because you get the benefits of nattokinase, plus the entire suite of systemic proteolytic enzymes, including C-Pros-S, serrapeptidase or serratiopeptidase, depending upon how you pronounce that, different pH-specific proteases, bromelain, papain, and the two peptidases rather. So whereas nattokinase is more of a therapeutic single dose nutrient, to me Therozyme is the broad spectrum with a single dose, and if you want therapeutic doses, you have to take more of them. But to me, this is one of the best preventions for systemic inflammatory management, systemic immune management, and making sure that specific body systems are not being overly bombarded with the unfortunate reality of the accumulation proteins as a result of daily life. Even if you eat really well, we don't always chew our food properly. Even if you make the best choices, we can't necessarily avoid life stresses. Sometimes sleep gets compromised. Things happen. When the body is experiencing perturbations and chronic stresses, it is the compromised state of the immune system that has to essentially pick up the pieces. Using something like Therozyme is really what can work very well as a long-term proactive approach to helping your body manage any kind of pro-inflammatory or immune stimulating abuse. And the other thing that we have that contains nattokinase, and specifically the form of nattokinase SD, is cranzyme. And cranzyme's a really cool product because it has a combination of enzymes, fiber, and nutraceuticals in the form of cranberry juice powder. So to me, this is a synergistic blend of an antimicrobial aspect, which is the cranberry juice, and the antioxidant. You have the sun fiber, which is a prebiotic, which also helps to balance out potential pathogens. And in some cases, there is some research to show that nattokinase can be somewhat of an antibiofilm agent. So you have to remember when it comes to things like UTI, the issue becomes that the microbiome relative to the kidneys, the urethra, and the urinary tract in general infections based upon changes in internal environment, pH, acidity of the urine, a lack of drinking adequate amounts of water to flush the kidneys and flush the urethra. So again, this is a product that can be used as a preventative strategy for anyone who may be predisposed or has had a history of chronic UTIs, or when someone has one and they're not able to clear it, using this as a standalone treatment, or if need be, in conjunction with something like an antibiotic, can actually create a synergistic effect because although we don't love the use of antibiotics as natural health practitioners, sometimes they are required. And when they are required, you can use enzymes in addition to antibiotics and, of course, probiotics to deal with a potential negative offset to make the treatments more effective and thus hopefully clearing the infection from your system once and for all. So always remember that nattokinase and nattozyme is the star of the show, but if people want to use nattokinase, we have other products that do contain this wonderfully ubiquitous and very diverse nutrient that seems to be the single greatest thing we have natural treatment for keeping the cardiovascular system healthy, keeping the pipes clear, and breaking down any potential clots that form from poor diet, poor lifestyle, sometimes have to make. And with that, I thank you everyone for your attention. I thank you for your time. As always, it's great to have you here. We'll be back next month with another feature, and we will take some questions now if anyone has them.
So Roland, I did, there was a couple that I answered as you were talking just on the half-life should come up. We had that in some of the research we were looking at. And then a link there. The other one was the lumbrokinase, nattokinase. I actually shared the link of your video. So it was an 8-minute video. And we do have time now if there's anything you do want to say as far as lumbrokinase. And I'll just remind everybody that January of this year, we looked at hypertension, lumbrokinase, and nattokinase. And there was a whole webinar that we have on our YouTube where Roland really breaks down not only just hypertension, but then more on lumbro, natto. The short video in the chat answer was actually from a question and answer that we did where it had come up and it gets spoken to there. So that's a great video. You can check that out. And then looks like maybe like an anecdotal case here, Roland, which kind of like the Ask Us Anything we just did in August. think you spoke to some of this on just, nattokinase and kind of needing that holistic approach, it being part of the solution, but maybe some other, lifestyle things to be looking at. But if you wanted to just take a look in the chat room, there was a few
Yep,
questions I
I
hadn't got
see them
to.
here. So I see I was contemplating using nattokinase for my husband who has a very high LPA. So LPA is yeah, the thing that can actually remove the fibrous cap from an arterial plaque buildup and cause immobilization of the clot, and a calcium artery score of 299, and he smokes. So that's a cardiovascular system that's been under some stress. Um, what Nattokinase will not induce a blood clot. The only thing that induces a clot is when the thrombotic lesion essentially leaves the destination where it's accumulated and it starts to circulate. So that's not what would likely happen with using nattokinase. It would start to act upon the, unfortunately, probably multiple areas where there are system. If you want to introduce nattokinase and you want to be as gentle as possible, no one says that you have to do a capsule, maybe start one or two a week and see if there's any perceivable change. Now, with a systemic enzyme, the likelihood of someone feeling enzyme doing its thing is low, but never say never. But to this person, I would say start with maybe two or three capsules a week. And, if there is an anti coagulant like nature and he starts to feel better, maybe his blood's flowing better, he's feeling more energy, then ramp it up slowly. I would say make sure you get some imaging done just to see what, the sin with is. But I don't believe that there would be any worry about nattokinase generating a clot because there's no research that I've seen to say that. What I would say is where the slide that has the dosing suggestions, read through that study because they used patients that had a very similar scenario to what your husband's dealing with. So that would be worth a read because they were giving those people 10 capsules per day or almost 11 capsules a day. So that's the best that I can say, but I don't think there would be worry. But if there's a cautious way to implement, I would say do two or three capsules a week and allow him to ramp that up over the course of 2 to 4 weeks. And if all things are looking good, maybe start to introduce a daily capsule and think about it being something that he's going to be using over the next indefinite period of time. Okay, second question. Nattokinase be taken after triple bypass along with standard meds? So the only time, Susan, that there is a contraindication with nattokinase is under conditions of someone taking a blood thinner. Now, the likelihood is both are able to be taken simultaneously, but I can in good conscience say if someone's on heparin or warfarin or Coumadin or any blood thinners, I would suggest they take nattokinase until they've stopped those medications or unless they decide to want to do so. So if the person that you're speaking about is taking a blood thinner at the moment, I would not suggest taking nattokinase, even though it has an incredible safety profile. The worry there is the inability to clot if that person cuts themselves, to which, again, I've never heard of someone taking nattokinase bleeding out, but medically speaking, I don't think in good conscience I could say anything otherwise. Anonymous attendee is asking, do you like the MK4 or the MK7? So it's an interesting question. I remember years ago, everyone became MK7 focused when it came to vitamin K2. And the research about that was based upon the fact that the amount of MK7 detectable in the blood post supplementation was far greater than that of MK4. And then it was put forth or postulated that the reason MK4 has lower blood values post supplementation is because it's uptaken more readily and more easily by the body. I don't have a personal preference over MK4 or MK7. I'm not up to date on the latest research because I don't use a lot of vitamin K2 in my practice. But I would say that either one is probably just fine. If the best products out there made by companies are still containing MK7, I would say go with that one. Okay. the compliment, Valerie. It seems that so many patients are taking or other anticoagulants.
Same thing.
Again, same thing. So it's kind of I don't want to call it a formality style of indication, but they do say that any anticoagulant should not be taken with under anything else that provides an anticoagulant-like effect. So that includes fish oil, systemic enzymes, anything that thins the blood. So it's hard to say. I can't promote the use of them concurrently, but if you have good reason to transition someone from a medicine to a natural supplement, maybe there's a little bit of a crossover period that can happen. But ultimately, I would say have the client get off of the anticoagulant if they are willing to do so before you start to transition them over to nattokinase.
That is we are, other than the FDA, warning that's on everything, that's one that we put on with the systemic enzymes. It's just any other blood thinners, just to be aware of it. Something like ibuprofen, even just, but if we're talking to practitioners, which we are, what we tell people is, if you're doing it with under the scope of your healthcare professional, then that's in your discretion as far as what they're taking together there. That is on all the systemic enzymes, as Roland's you know um, calling out. That is an extra warning we put on all of them.
Mhm.
Thank
And
you,
in
Roland.
some cases, back to someone asking Natto versus Lumbro, I don't believe Lumbro has the same anticoagulant properties, so maybe that might be a scenario where you would pick one over the other given what it does systemically and what it doesn't do versus nattokinase. But again, please do the research. Don't just take my word for it beyond doing some of your own digging. So Raj says, I use arterisol and nitric oxide for my patients with cardiovascular disease, two great products. Another good one at Berkeley Life is a great nitric oxide product. I agree with you. The nattokinase would be a great addition for preventative strategies because, again, there's no negative consequence on someone who's not taking a blood thinner. When it comes to enzymes not utilized, they're just broken down and the amino acids are likely recycled. So, I'm taking a regular basis at my age because I just want to keep as healthy as I can be for the longest possible time. And if I can do so without any negative consequences, me is a daily dose of nattokinase, I'm in. So I agree, Raj. That's a nice triple threat there. Although I don't know if we should call it the triple threat when we're talking about the cardiovascular system. Threat and disease, not a good thing. Call that the triple whammy.
And
Whammy.
the half-life, I had typed it as a typed response earlier, but it says up to 3 hours in the blood is what the one Science Direct, I had referenced that earlier. So
And nattokinase is incredibly shelf stable as a product in and of itself. I even believe the raw material before we encapsulate it can sustain 2 years just on the shelf without any attrition to its potency. So, if you've ordered a bunch of nattokinase and you've forgotten about it, do put it into practice because it's still going to be good. And if you're doing cardiovascular practice correctly, patients are probably going to be going through a decent amount of nattokinase. So definitely, the efficacy and the potency of the product.
thank you, Roland. We've got Jeff Thurston on a webinar next week. I'll just chime in on that little plug, and on our website you can register for it just on the homepage, but we'll have some notifications coming out. I'll probably tack it on with the link to this recording and with Roland's slides, because I know some of those graphs in there, especially the one where it's breaking down the 3 different ways that nattokinase is working mechanistically against fibrin, indirectly and directly. So we'll have that. You guys can go back and view those, view the recording, and then register for next week's webinar. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and Dr. Eric Belkovich is coming back for our newest masterclass, our first repeat guest on the masterclass. He'll be the latter half of September, and then October will be here before we know it, and we'll have another new feature. So it's a busy month.
Yeah, definitely lots going on, and 4, I think, physical trade shows. So maybe some of us will see some of you out there in the real world and not just on a Zoom screen. So we'll look forward to that.
Very much so. Thank you everyone for attending. Jeff, thank you again. Hope everyone enjoyed.
Likewise. Thanks, Roland. Have a good one. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.